Welcome to Mississippi History from a Christian Perspective. I'm your host, Tracy Robinson. This is Lesson 2. In this lesson, we'll learn about the European explorers who sought to understand and gain from the territory around the Mississippi. History records that the first Europeans to set foot in Mississippi were Spaniards. In 1519, Alonso de Pineda sailed along the northern shore of the Gulf of Mexico in exploration for Spain. It's possible that he landed along Mississippi's Gulf Coast. Tragically, most of his crew were lost in a stormy shipwreck in the Gulf of Mexico. In 1528, Panfilo Narvaez explored the area from Tampa Bay to the mouth of the Mississippi River. Again, tragedy struck as he and his fleet were swept out to sea by a tremendous storm. Some of his crew, however, including another explorer, Cabeza de Vaca, bravely managed to reach safety in Mexico. Hernando de Soto heard about the travels of his fellow countrymen. He organized an expedition which included many Spanish nobles. All of these men were fascinated by stories of gaining great wealth. De Soto and his crew landed in Tampa Bay in 1539 and began a trek that carried him through Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Texas. Although they traveled extensively, theirs was a futile search for gold. De Soto entered the Mississippi region sometime in 1540. After crossing the Tombigbee River in December of that year, he encountered the Chickasaw tribe at Old Town. He decided to spend the winter with these friendly Indians and established his camp close to theirs. The following spring, De Soto was encouraged to resume his westward travels when the Chickasaw set fire to his camp. Historians believe this attack, which ended in the loss of 11 men and 50 horses, resulted from De Soto's imperious demand that the chief provide him with guides and bearers from the tribe. In that day and age, the Europeans typically saw themselves as better than or above the Native Americans. They saw them as being savages or as being beneath them or below them in society. De Soto's exploration team reached the Mississippi River somewhere near Tunica. They crossed the river and spent the following winter in Arkansas. De Soto himself, sadly, never saw Spain again. He died somewhere in the wilderness along the Mississippi River in 1542. Initially, he was buried along the river, then later his body was exhumed by his men. They wrapped his body in animal skins, weighted it down with sand, and dropped it into the river. The remaining members of the expedition, which had been considerably depleted by sickness, disease, and war, attempted to go overland to Mexico. But when this failed, they assembled crude ships and sailed down the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico, where they finally reached Cuba in 1543. De Soto had not accomplished his goal of finding a fortune in gold, but he did give Spain a claim over a very large area of land in the southeastern corner of North America. In Mississippi, De Soto County is named after Hernando de Soto, and the city of Hernando, Mississippi, within the county of De Soto, was named after him as well. Next came the French explorers. After establishing colonies in Canada, the French began exploration down the Mississippi River. The first French explorer of the Mississippi River was actually a missionary. In 1673, Father Jacques Marquette set out to find where the Mississippi ended and to assess the attitude of the Indians living along its bank toward the French. Louis Jollet, a first trader, joined Marquette. Marquette and Jollet set out on May of 1673, along with 5 others. They traveled in simple birch bark canoes and only carried what they absolutely needed. Theirs was to be a contrast to De Soto's ill-fated expedition. The expedition reached as far as present-day Rosedale, Mississippi. Although the Indians were not always friendly, Marquette's diplomacy and knowledge of native languages served him well. After learning from the Indians that the river they traveled did indeed flow into the Gulf of Mexico, the explorers turned around and returned to Canada. The next Frenchman to explore the Mississippi River was LaSalle, whose expedition was larger than Marquette's. The group included 49 people. The expedition started in August of 1681. LaSalle, too, was a great diplomat. He made friends with many of the tribes along the river. He arrived at the mouth of the Mississippi River in April of 1682 and promptly claimed it for the area of the Mississippi Valley for the King of France. LaSalle named the territory Louisiana in honor of King Louis XIV. LaSalle eventually returned to France and organized another expedition to make a permanent settlement in Louisiana. The expedition, however, was not a success. LaSalle's fleet of ships was wrecked, and he was later murdered by some of his own group as they traveled to reach Canada. Not until 1699, 17 years later, did France attempt to settle in the Mississippi Valley again. Charles Le Moyne, who had a large part in the success of the French colonization of Canada, was asked to lead in the colonization of Louisiana. His two sons, Pierre and JeanBaptiste, are remembered today by their titles of nobility, Lord d'Iberville, Pierre, and Lord Bienville, Jean-Baptiste. Iberville was placed in charge of 200 colonists, including his own brother, Lord Bienville. They would eventually become the first Europeans to settle in the lower Mississippi Valley. Upon arrival in the New World, the French anchored off the coast of Mississippi near Ship Island. They made friends with the local Indians, the Biloxi tribe. The Biloxi tribe is believed to be an offshoot of the lineage of the Choctaw and the Chickasaw. And they were a coastal tribe that lived near the beaches of the coast, and they foraged, they hunted, and they had agriculture. Iberville entered the Mississippi River and traveled around 300 miles upstream. Then he returned to the friendly Biloxi tribe, where he decided to build a fort. The fort eventually became the location of the town of Ocean Springs. Iberville named the encampment Fort Maurepas in honor of the son of the French Navy minister Count Maurepas. The settlement was named Biloxi. Iberville returned to France, leaving his brother Bienville behind in Biloxi. Now in charge, Bienville set out to explore. He traveled as far east as Mobile Bay before turning back west. He had reached the Mississippi River and began to explore it further when he encountered an English ship on the river. The date was September 16th of 1699. The place where the English ship turned and abandoned their exploration at Bienville's request is known today as English Turn. Bienville's brother, Iberville, returned from France with settlers in the year 1700. Iberville then made his own exploration of the Mississippi River. He made treaties with the Natchez Indians and negotiated with them for the site of Fort Rosalie. The French also allied themselves with the Choctaw. The capital of the Louisiana Territory was moved in 1702 to Mobile in present-day Alabama. That same year, Iberville left the area to attend to business, but during the course of his travels, he contracted yellow fever and died. His younger brother, Bienville, assumed leadership over the colony, but he was only moderately successful as a leader. Bienville tried to attract families who were willing to stay and farm the area, and he managed to bring 23 young women to the fledgling colony. Perhaps, however, these young ladies had not been told all of the hardships that they would face. Eventually, their discontent led to what is referred to as the petticoat insurrection. The women threatened to leave the colony at the first opportunity if their lot was not improved. Sometime later, Bienville was charged with embezzling money from the colony. Now, he was cleared of all charges, but the colony still failed to be the success he hoped. The discontentment of the settlers showed in their lackluster farming, which brought many of them to the point of starvation. The King of France was not blind to the lack of progress in the fledgling Louisiana colony. In disgust, he leased the colony to a French businessman named Anthony Crozat. In 1710, Crozat replaced Governor Bienville with Antoine de la Mothe Cadillac. Cadillac had previously served in the army in Canada. Even with this change in command, Bienville remained as the colony's lieutenant governor. Cadillac was not impressed with the new territory he governed. He was convinced that people could live a life of ease and luxury in this new colony, but he was sadly mistaken. The land was still unsettled frontier with its share of danger and hardships. Cadillac experienced trouble. These problems were not alleviated by his second-in-command. Instead, Bienville, used to being in charge, did not relish the relinquishing of his authority. And at one time, the colonists, with Bienville's encouragement, threatened mutiny to the governor. Possibly to get him out of the way, Cadillac sent Bienville to settle a dispute with the Natchez Indians. Bienville settled the dispute and got the Indians to begin construction on Fort Rosalie. When he returned, he learned to his joy that Cadillac had been removed as governor. He also learned that he was once again in charge. But that leadership did not last long. Bienville was soon replaced by another appointee from the king. In the end, Crozat lost all interest in the worrisome colony, and he left it to flounder. The next man to undertake the task of developing the Louisiana colony was John Law. Now, if the name John Law does not sound French, that's because it's not. John Law was fleeing from his native Scotland when he arrived in France. He had killed a man in a duel and was condemned to hang, but somehow he managed to escape. In 1715, France was in dire financial straits due to several costly wars. An optimistic gambler, John Law felt that he had the solution to France's financial problems. Law organized a company called the Mississippi Company. He brought 1,600 people, subjects of a German prince, to Louisiana to become his colonists. They settled on the Mississippi River above New Orleans. As the enterprises before him, Law's company also failed to bring the expected profits. Law once again found himself in disgrace. The scheme became known as the Mississippi Bubble because it stood only on air. In our next lesson, we will discuss new efforts by France to colonize the area around the Mississippi River. This has been your host, Tracy Robinson. Be sure to like, subscribe, and ring that bell to never miss a video. Thanks for learning with me.